Aristidis, please.
Thank you. So I think I do share the worries, and perhaps because I was rushed, I sounded very, very optimistic. But I think that China has become the unavoidably necessary partner in any development initiative that is involved in anything to do with the African continent, and South Africa in particular. The old world has disappeared from South Africa. The North is a minuscule part of our trade and our interactions these days. IPSA made absolute sense because we have the same civil society pressures and we understand that very easily. And China is our major economic partner. So in South African terms, it makes sense. We talk and but we arrive at key, just to answer, whether we lost the developmental aspect. Yes, we lost the technical discussion in Johannesburg, but we did achieve some major developmental breakthroughs. For example, watch out for the Center for Vaccine Development and Research. Watch out for the consequences in terms of renewables, and major resources are going to go into that, and you will have to guide them, that process, because it can go haywire. So yes, we did lose that momentum that started in India, so it's Brazil's turn to pick it up. Your turn. Thank you.
Professor Pierre Curiel, please.
With regards to triangular development cooperation, I would like to reiterate on what Stephen said. There has been the emergence of inter-regional groupings and also triangular development cooperation. This is the participation between the traditional donors, emerging donor and low-income country. So this is also emergence of TDC. It's a recent power shifts in international system. From this perspective, we can say rise of emerging powers like Brazil, China, and India, growing centers of power outside the US, also indicates new international multilateralism. This is what I personally think. Thank you.
Thank you. Gerardo, please, you have the floor.
I mean, first on South-South cooperation and concessionality, I think the main issue here is that we have to recognize that there's a big, we have 60 years since the Bandung spirit since the Bandung conference was happened, and the original idea of South-South cooperation as having all these kind of links, as covering all links without any issue of concessionality or if it was profit motivated or concessionality, it made sense in 1955 where there were no links. But 63 years later, I think we have actually to make the step forward and recognize that if we're talking about South-South cooperation, it really makes sense to think only on concessional flows and concessional policies. That will be the big difference, because today we still have this old Bandung definition where there's no difference between profit motive and concessionality. And then on this SDG 17, well, what can I say? I think Thomas answered this very well, so I won't go back to the idea that SDG 17 is something only from the North. And I would just add that in SDG 17 we have two issues that are on the heart of the South-South narrative since Bandung, and one is trade and the other one is technological transfer. Both issues are taken over by the compact development compact definition, and I really see that they are both of them southern. Both of them come from the south. The north has never really taken up these two issues. So SDG 17, I would say, is quite related to the South-South narrative.
Jalal Sadat, please.
So I think the question was, how can we measure the impact of our projects? So first thing I can say is how many people you can make smile in this place. And the second thing is we have, our embassy sends us reports every monthly or yearly, it depends on the project. This was your question, yeah? So the embassy sends us reports yearly or monthly. It depends on the project, that what is the impact, where is the project going through, and how many people are benefiting from it, and how many countries are benefiting from it. And also we were only established like 3 years ago, so the impact we'll see it in the upcoming years. So, thank you.
Thank you. So to end this section, to conclude this section, final remarks from Sachin. Again, thank you for hosting this. Fantastic. Please, Sachin.
Thank you. Thanks, Paolo. Before I start, I must thank you for being such a tough chair. It was excellent, and that could help us manage time, and I was just busy texting two speakers of the next session that we are running late, and as you know, we have listed our G20 Sherpa, who is extremely busy, so I have informed them. Now, I have long list of my notes, but I would be extremely brief, and please don't consider this as my summary, but since as a co-chair I am responsible for some comments, I would just make it. I think Bracho made excellent point in terms of bringing in the heterogeneity of Asian and Latin American approaches, and Professor Arecitas and of course Pelani also brought in the idea of how the African pathways are relevant. So these kind of dimensions are important for us to see what work Anthea and Asia Foundation has done on Asian approaches, and what SEGIB has done on Latin American approaches. The heterogeneity is reflected through the idea of education, economic and culture, as Professor Sitaz mentioned, and I think it is important for us to see how what Pilani was mentioning in terms of expanding the entrepreneurial base that is required, and South-South cooperation is very much about self-reliance. It is not about perpetual dependence, and that point came out quite forcefully. So how we close assistance at the earliest and confine it to partnership is something that has come out quite forcefully. The idea of development compact, and as we heard Ambassador Amar Sinha describing it as Panchamrit with the 5 modalities, I think is important reference point with coherence and of course the precision that is required. Laura Lopez, I am not getting into the debate about the broader or the narrower interpretation. Technical facets of cooperation is extremely important, and the reality comes in with the sectoral dimension of it. As Professor Bishambar Pokhriyal also mentioned, the mission is to help each other. The idea is to bring in cooperation modalities there, and from that point of view, the theoretical connect has to reflect on this. The idea of concessionality, particularly the Bandung, Bapa and ODA reference, but also the reference to multiplex and the point that Thomas raised in terms of BRICS and their aid agencies and their conversation, I think is extremely important. We would explore this more as we move forward. Stefan has contributed immensely by bringing in the confusion and the rationale related issues within OECD, and his idea of hybrids, particularly by quoting the example of South Korea and others, is important. He also talked about new contestations in IR and also institutional innovations that are important. Reference to SDG 17 is, I think, extremely important, where North and South are expected to work together, but the issue, as Andre very rightly referred to, is in terms of how we bring in the indicators. And Thomas, as you probably might have seen, all the indicators for Goal 17 are in the category 3, in the tier 3, and tier 3 reflects the one where consensus has not been achieved. The idea of coherence and definition of triangular development cooperation is again taken up, and I think it's important that NEST and this platform of Delhi process continue to define how we go forward on triangular development cooperation. As was mentioned rightly, the southernization of northern approach is probably maybe the way forward, but then what would be the rules of the game, as South is not making any effort to define them. So I think it's important. The star for this session was, of course, this statement that we heard: we are not just receiving, but we are giving as well. This, I think, deserves a huge and a very warm applause from everyone in this room. I think this spirit of PICA, Palestinian International Cooperation Agency, is the actual spirit of South-South cooperation. That's the spirit with which solidarity and commitment for development comes in. But of course, as we heard Jorge Shadek yesterday, without goal 2 of food security, we can't move forward. So food is there, and it's laid out in the room upstairs in Jacaranda. And we come back here at 2:30. Thank you. So group photo with the stars. Professor Siddharth, can we have a photograph with you? The group photo. Come closer. We would be beginning our next session. Our dignitaries are already on the dais. I would request Director of the UN Office on South-South Cooperation, Mr. Jorge Shadek, to join us here. I would request everyone to please settle down and we start the session. Thank you. So friends, once you settle down, we begin. We already have Professor Muchkund Dubey in chair, so I would request everyone to settle down. Those of you who are aware of the UNCTAD and the work related to that, Professor Muchkund Dubey has contributed immensely in terms of rise of the South, both in terms of contributing to the narrative of the South-South cooperation, but also in terms of how we look at the issues related to South-South cooperation in terms of the associated institutions. As Additional Secretary in Ministry of External Affairs and later as Foreign Secretary, he gave a major boost to the rise of UNCTAD and UNCTAD as an institution in terms of how South-South cooperation is taken care of. I was digging out some of the earlier publications of RIS, and I noticed that in 1987, RIS published a collection of discussions that we had in that year when Raul Prabisk was at RIS. And one of the major commentaries in the paper, in the volume, is by Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was our Prime Minister, as all of you know. And the other was by Professor Muchkund Dubey, who at that point was Additional Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs. So here is someone today who has shaped this narrative for so many years, both within the system, and of course after coming out he joined Jawaharlal Nehru University as professor. RIS had the privilege of having access to him all the time, both in his assignments within the system, but even later. One of his papers on G20, which he did a couple of years back for us, is very widely quoted. I visited G77, where again I found papers by Professor Muchkund Dubey. And just now we were discussing during lunch break how South Center has around 12 papers of Professor Dubey. So we are very fortunate that in him we have somebody who is who may well be classified as practitioner, but somebody who is also thoroughly academic in terms of how we move on further when it comes to South-South cooperation and its substantiation. Sir, I'm extremely grateful to you for agreeing to chair this session. May I now request you to take over the proceedings? Thank you.
Before starting the proceedings, friends, before starting the proceedings, I stand here to remind you of the sad demise of one of the giants among the thinkers of the third world, Samir Amin, in Paris yesterday. I think that he has shaped the thinking of on the North-South relationship through his dependency theory and subsequent work more decisively than any other economist that I can recall. He was strikingly original in his thinking. Even a small piece of writing